She joined the FBI to serve with integrity. What she found instead was a civil war inside the Bureau, one fighting to protect Americans and one fighting for power. This is the story Nicole Parker says the FBI never wanted you to hear.
We read The Two FBIs, The Bravery and Betrayal I Saw in My Time at the Bureau by Nicole Parker, so you don't have to.
And this is a really intense deep dive. We're going inside one of America's most, let's say, complex and scrutinized institutions, the FBI.
We are, and we're doing it through the eyes of Nicole Parker. She was a special agent for over 12 years. She was dedicated to investigating some of the most serious crimes you can imagine.
But she ultimately resigned. And she did it over what she describes as, well, an internal decay and the political weaponization of the very bureau she had sworn to serve.
So just to set the stage, Parker was an FBI special agent from 2010 to 2022, mostly based out of the Miami field office.
And by all accounts, she was a top agent. Her professional reputation was stellar. She investigated high-level white-collar fraud. She worked fugitive recoveries.
Really tough, complex stuff. And she was known for her work on violent crime cases. She got multiple honors, like the Medal of Excellence, 3 Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer Awards.
So she wasn't some disgruntled agent on the sidelines. She was in the thick of it.
Exactly. But the whole story of her career, and really the book itself, it's rooted in a national tragedy and a profound sense of duty.
It is. The book opens with it. The catalyst for her leaving a really lucrative career in finance to even join the FBI was a single event.
9/11.
9/11.
Absolutely. She's just 23 years old. She was working in high finance at the World Financial Center, which is, right next to the World Trade Center complex.
And she describes witnessing what she calls incomprehensible evil firsthand. As the towers were falling, she was trying to evacuate, got trapped in an elevator. Just absolutely terrifying.
I can't even imagine.
And it was right there, in that moment of crisis, facing what she thought was certain death, that she made a spiritual vow.
The vow. She capitalizes it throughout the book.
And she does. The vow was that if she survived, she would make her life a testimony to integrity and service. She'd move away from, just chasing wealth and toward a life of real contribution. And that vow became her moral compass.
And that experience, that violent intrusion of death into a totally normal Wall Street morning, that's what led her to the central question of this whole memoir.
Which is?
How did one of the most respected institutions in America, an agency built on integrity, become so fundamentally divided against itself?
And that question leads us directly to the core thesis of the two FBIs. It's right there in the title. Parker argues that during her time, there were two fundamentally distinct organizations operating under the same roof.
FBI 1 and FBI 2.
FBI 1 and FBI 2. Her entire experience is framed by the tension and eventually the collision between these two entities. So our mission here is really to unpack what she saw and why she believes this internal division is at the heart of the Bureau's current crisis.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with a road that took her from a successful Wall Street career right into the very disciplined world of Quantico.
Her background is pretty unique for an FBI recruit. She graduated early from BYU, built this really successful career in New York finance, New York Life, Merrill Lynch.
She eventually became a vice president at Bank of America. She even talks about executing this incredibly complicated multi-billion-dollar trade just flawlessly.
So she had it all, right? Everything that the financial world promises.
Mm-hmm.
But she describes that success as empty.
That promise she made on 9/11 just lingered. It fueled this sense that money was, at the end of the day, inconsequential compared to service. She needed something else.
And that nudge came in 2009. A friend suggested the FBI. Her background in complex finance was seen as a huge asset.
Especially then, right, in the wake of the subprime mortgage crisis.
Exactly. The Bureau needed agents who actually understood how these big financial firms worked so they could, bust them effectively.
But the application process was not easy. She details this multi-year process, the interviews, the physical fitness tests, and the infamous SF-86 background check.
Oh yeah, that thing is legendary. You have to account for every single aspect of your life, going all the way back to age 18.
She really emphasizes how intense and slow and controlled that process was. At the time, she says, it was designed to screen for just impeccable integrity and suitability.
And then came Quantico. She describes the training as this intense, almost militaristic environment designed to break you down and then build you back up as an agent.
And she struggled, right, with firearms training.
She did. She had this mental block that almost caused her to fail out. She needed specialized intervention just to pass the qualification. But later, she was grateful for that rigor. She believed it instilled the discipline you need in the field.
A discipline, she claims, started to fade as the years went on and standards declined.
Right. So after graduation, she gets assigned to the Miami field office, starts in white-collar crimes, the C1 squad.
And she inherits these dog cases, she calls them, old, less active cases.
But she quickly realized that, while busting Ponzi schemes was important, it didn't satisfy that desire she had for direct life-saving impact.
That's what led her to the Violent Crime Fugitive Task Force, the C-15 squad.
And in Miami, that squad was considered elite. It was mostly made up of agents with prior law enforcement or military experience, former Navy SEALs, seasoned police detectives.
And that's where she felt she really found her calling, actively protecting victims.
She describes the culture of that squad as the absolute epitome of FBI 1. It was all agents prioritizing helping others, putting in these grueling hours, sometimes 36 hours straight, without complaint, just focused on catching dangerous people.
And during this time, she formed a really important friendship with another special agent, Laura Schwarzenberger.
This is crucial to the whole story. Laura moved from that C-15 squad to the Violent Crimes Against Children squad, VCAC, and Parker just describes her as a role model. Gifted, quiet, confident, and completely devoted.
That friendship really becomes the moral centerpiece of the book, especially toward the end.
It really does.
So that brings us to the core argument, the detailed definitions of these two organizations inside the Bureau. Let's start with the one she celebrates, FBI 1.
Right. So FBI 1, for Parker, represents everything that is noble and honorable within the Bureau.
So these are the field agents, the ones doing the day-to-day work.
The vast majority of them, she insists. These are the ethical agents who uphold the Constitution and serve without letting political bias contaminate their work. Their mission is straightforward.
Protect Americans, pursue actual criminals, and solve cases based on facts and evidence.
Exactly. Based on the law, not on an agenda. She calls them the everyday heroes who work tirelessly, often for low pay and long hours, because they absolutely believe in that mission.
They're the backbone of the organization, the ones who command respect just by, showing their credentials.
That's how she frames it. They see their work as a calling, and it's focused on justice for the people they serve.
Okay, so now let's pivot to the counterpart. The organization that Parker claims actively corrupted the Bureau's purpose, FBI 2.
FBI 2, according to her, is everything broken and wrong with the agency, and she identifies this group primarily as leadership-level officials.
So not field agents.
Generally not. These are people in Washington, D.C., or in high administrative roles, who she says abuse their authority for self-serving reasons.
And how did this destructive influence, as she calls it, manifest?
She asserts that FBI 2 is defined by politically motivated decision-making. These leaders prioritize their careers, their political agendas, and their social standing over the core mission.
And that leads to what she calls the weaponization of investigations.
Exactly. Weaponization, misplaced priorities, and a systematic lowering of standards that she believes eroded the entire professional foundation of the agency.
What I found fascinating was her comment on the internal awareness of this. She mentions that the quarterly reports from the Office of Professional Responsibility, the OPR reports, the ones detailing violations by FBI 2 personnel, were sometimes read by FBI 1 agents for entertainment purposes.
It's a shocking detail, right?
Yeah.
She uses that anecdote to highlight just how audacious the ethical and administrative violations at the leadership level had become.
Things that would have gotten a rank-and-file agent fired instantly.
Fired and probably prosecuted. It just underlines this deep-seated hypocrisy she's describing, and the fact that the people on the ground knew about the rot at the top.
Okay, so this tension is the engine of the whole book.
Yeah.
Let's dive into some of the specific examples she gives of FBI 1 in action. This theme of bravery and service, the doer of good mentality.
She has some really powerful stories here. She recounts one arrest operation in Broward County. It was technically an FBI New York case, but Miami was assisting. They arrested a mother and father for a serious crime.
The arrests were standard, but it was the aftermath that wasn't.
Right. The team realizes the parents have two young daughters, 9 and 13, with no family in the U.S. to take them. The child protective investigator on scene basically tells Parker that putting them in the foster system will separate them and, quote, destroy them.
And she says this is where FBI 1 kicks in. They reject the idea of, not my case, not my problem.
Exactly. She and the New York agent start this desperate, frantic search for a neighbor, anyone suitable to take the girls. They find someone, but they're running out of time before the judge forces them into foster care.
And she describes this really intense scene in court. The judge is literally about to impose the deadline, and then
the power goes out, but only in that specific courtroom.
She attributes it to divine intervention, a miracle.
She does. And that brief pause gave the prosecutor enough time to successfully argue for an alternative. The judge grants the mother a temporary release just for one night, so she could arrange permanent care for her daughters before going to jail.
Unprecedented.
The CPIS investigator told her he'd never seen a ruling like that in 30 years. And for Parker, that story defines FBI 1, going way beyond the operational mandate for the sake of human compassion.
And beyond compassion, there's bravery. Her time on the fugitive task force, C-15, sounds like it was incredibly dangerous.
It was. She says they often had to act as a mini SWAT team. She recalls one arrest in 2015 of an out-of-state murder fugitive, a big guy, former collegiate athlete known to run.
During the arrest, she was covering the perimeter, Glock drawn. The guy was clearly thinking about fleeing, but he paused when he saw her.
And he later admitted that moment of hesitation is what led to his surrender. She uses it to highlight the split-second decisions and the constant danger of that work.
She also talks about a near-fatal high-speed chase. The fugitive was in a stolen Porsche and crashed head-on into the SWAT van she was in.
She survived without serious injury, but the impact was severe. It caused chronic back pain that plagued her for the rest of her career. But her first instinct
was pure FBI 1.
Pure FBI 1. She immediately jumped out of the wrecked van and chased the fugitive on foot. That willingness to risk everything, she says, is the standard for field agents.
And that commitment was really put to the test during 2 of South Florida's worst mass casualty events. She was the acting C-15 supervisor during the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting in 2017.
Yeah, she was responsible for organizing the entire FBI response in that chaos, processing the crime scene, organizing interviews with hundreds of traumatized witnesses. She talks about the immense trauma, the false alarm of a second shooter, all while having to maintain command.
And then just over a year later, February 2018, the Parkland school shooting.
She responded to Stoneman Douglas High School. She's at the reunification center and just describes the absolute devastation on the parents' faces.
And it was there that she was personally approached by the Florida Attorney General at the time, Pam Bondi.
Right. Bondi specifically asked Parker to be the one to conduct the death notifications. She sensed in her a kind soul, as Parker puts it.
And Parker describes this realization that her whole path, her whole career leading to FBI Miami was for that exact tragic purpose, to show love and grace to these families in their darkest hour.
She says she conducted several notifications, just weeping and sitting with the families. She emphasizes that FBI 1 agents are human beings, not robots.
It's that very integrity and humanity that Parker argues FBI 2 was actively working to destroy. So let's move into that third theme. The rise of FBI 2, the politics, the power, and the betrayal she alleges.
She really pinpoints the start of this crisis of integrity back in Washington, D.C., specifically with the handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Internally, it was called Operation Midyear Exam, or MYE.
And she says she and her colleagues, the FBI 1 agents, were just stunned by Director James Comey's public statement in July 2016.
Universally stunned. Comey said that while Clinton and her aides were extremely careless with classified material, quote, no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case.
Parker calls this a catastrophic, destructive turning point, where political influence just steamrolled standard investigative practice.
In the book, she's very clear. She says any rank-and-file agent who handled classified info that way would have faced immediate consequences, probably jail time.
So that decision, in her view, created a double standard. One set of rules for the politically powerful and another for everyone else.
It signaled to FBI 1, as she puts it, that Lady Justice was no longer blind. She was picking out from under the blindfold.
And Parker links this alleged political bias directly to the next big investigation, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, the investigation into the Trump campaign.
The book asserts very strongly that this investigation was manufactured.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning that instead of following evidence where it led, she argues that FBI 2 management started with a conclusion, that there was a connection to Russian interference, and then went searching for evidence to support it, which is the complete opposite of how the FBI is supposed to operate.
And a key part of that manufacturing, in her view, was the use of the Steele dossier in FISA applications.
Right. She contends that dossier was widely seen internally as unreliable. She even says the CIA viewed it as no better than internet rumors. But FBI2 leadership signed off on it anyway.
The book also details the involvement of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who worked on both of these investigations.
And their anti-Trump text messages, she argues, provided explicit evidence of the deep political bias that was contaminating the leadership's decision-making. For the FBI-1 agents on the ground, it just confirmed their worst fears that the agency was being weaponized against a political party.
And the tragedy, she argues, is that these political failures were compounded by institutional failures that cost lives. And that brings the rot right back to her own backyard in Miami. Parkland.
She dedicates a lot of the book to this, the devastating institutional failure. 5.5 weeks before the shooting, the FBI's tip line, the public access line, or PL, got a highly detailed 13-minute tip about the shooter.
The caller laid it all out, the threats, the reference to ISIS, the weapons, his explicit desire to shoot up a school.
It was a textbook, credible threat by her assessment, but the PL operator and their supervisor, they failed to document it or forward the tip to the Miami field office.
Why? What was the justification?
They classified it as a local matter. Essentially, they washed their hands of a critical federal-level threat. And for agents like Parker, that procedural failure where established protocols were just ignored was devastating. They felt they were never even given the chance to investigate what could have been a preventable tragedy.
She then uses the Larry Nassar sexual abuse case as another example of this incompetence and negligence at the institutional level.
Right. The allegations were first reported in July 2015, but she says FBI Indianapolis failed to act or even properly document victim interviews for 8 months.
And multiple offices, Indianapolis and LA, failed to notify local authorities in Michigan.
And the consequence of that failure, she highlights, was the continued abuse of 70 or more athletes over the next 2 years.
And what was the accountability for that?
That's her point. She claims employees misrepresented their actions, and the institutional punishment was just a mandatory virtual academy training course that was imposed on all FBI agents. So FBI-1 was being punished for the failures of FBI-2.
This internal rot, she claims, then accelerated into what she calls outright political weaponization. This is where she discusses the January 6th investigation.
She calls it the largest waste of time, personnel resources, and money in FBI history.
Her main point here is the disproportionate use of resources. She alleges that FBI-2 was frequently deploying SWAT teams for nonviolent misdemeanor cases related to J6.
She viewed it as political intimidation, especially when you compare it to the lack of tactical support for agents going after, say, violent child predators.
And she says that perceived political motivation peaked with the Mar-a-Lago raid in August 2022.
She claims that raid was clearly political. She asserts the urgency and the level of resources deployed just far exceeded what was necessary for the investigation.
And on a personal level, she was outraged by the behavior she allegedly witnessed from some of the Miami support staff.
Yes. She claims they were celebrating and taking selfies during the raid, an act of unprofessionalism that, for her, just confirmed that political bias had completely overridden ethical conduct.
And this alleged targeting wasn't just for high-profile figures. She brings up the case of Mark Huck,
a pro-life advocate. He was arrested by the FBI with what she calls excessive force after local authorities in Philadelphia had already declined to press charges over a minor incident.
So she sees this as evidence of FBI-2 being used as a tool by the DOJ to silence conservative voices.
That's her argument. And beyond the politics, she also noticed a systemic decay in the quality of new agents. She says around 2018, she and other seasoned agents saw this gradual decline in competence.
And she attributes this directly to what?
To FBI-2 prioritizing diversity hiring quotas over core competency and merit. She contends that emphasizing representation over rigorous qualifications undermined the agency's professional standing.
And paradoxically, she says it created a stigma for genuinely qualified minority agents who then had to face internal skepticism about whether they were there on merit.
Right. And she claims this lowering of standards went all the way back to Quantico. That the academic and physical rigor she went through was being watered down, compromising the entire talent pipeline of the Bureau.
So it's clear Parker believes these systemic failures were deeply demoralizing. But the real breaking point for her was about profound personal loss, an ultimate test of loyalty.
And this is where the friendship with Special Agent Laura Schwarzenberger becomes the emotional anchor for her entire decision to leave.
On February 2, 2021, Laura was tragically killed in the line of duty by a child predator while executing a search warrant in Sunrise, Florida.
Parker describes the profound shock. She even recalls this distinct intuition she had weeks earlier that Laura should change squads, that she might be involved in a shooting. a premonition that just deepened her grief.
And the loss for Laura's family, her husband Jason and 2 young sons, was just immense.
And this tragedy is what brought that disparity of resources into the sharpest possible focus for her.
The contrast. She notes how FBI too liberally used SWAT teams for J6 misdemeanors, which she saw as political theater.
Yet a specialized SWAT team was, in her words, inexplicably absent from Laura's incredibly dangerous child exploitation operation.
And she believes that tactical support likely would have saved her life.
She does. And that institutional disregard for the safety of an FBI-1 hero doing essential, non-political work, that was a betrayal she just couldn't reconcile.
And this feeling of disregard showed up in other ways, too. She talks about demanding that the FBI include Laura's strong Catholic faith in her official obituary.
Right. She discovered the initial draft had completely removed any mention of her faith, her core religious values.
So Parker asserts that while FBI 2 is eager to embrace what she calls progressive diversity topics, they were actively trying to erase the core identity of a fallen hero.
She saw it as a necessary act of loyalty to make sure Laura's life was honored accurately.
But the ultimate defining moment, the one that really sealed her path, happened just 18 hours before Laura's death.
Their final conversation. They shared this core belief that they would not let the Bureau become politicized.
And they made a vow to each other.
They explicitly vowed that if they were ever asked to participate in politically motivated operations, and they specifically cited the J6 misdemeanor arrests, they would refuse.
Regardless of the risk to their careers or their pensions?
Right. Laura stated clearly she would have no part in using law enforcement power of political intimidation. And that final vow, Parker explains, cemented her own moral path forward.
So after all that, the tragedy, the commitment to that shared moral stance, the internal conflict just became impossible to sustain for her.
It did. Her refusal to comply with what she saw as politically motivated actions escalated. She viewed the COVID vaccine mandate as the final political test of conformity.
And she refused to comply.
She did. She believed FBI 2 managers were actively targeting agents who sought religious exemptions. It felt to her like systematic discrimination against agents for their personal beliefs.
So she initially planned to resign in January 2022, but she officially left on September 19th, 2022.
And she explicitly cites the reasons: the 9/11 vow, the memory of Laura Schwarzenberger, and the political weaponization that had made the FBI unrecognizable from the organization she joined.
She admits to feeling profound embarrassment and shame about what the Bureau had become in her eyes.
Yeah, she says Director Wray was blissfully ignorant of the internal rot, and she felt the only way to truly honor FBI-1 values and to be a catalyst for change was to leave and speak out.
And since her resignation, she's been actively pursuing that mission. She's a contributor for Fox News Media now, and she consults for the America First Policy Institute on FBI reform.
Her current mission, as she argues it, is to use her insider story, which she sees as the ultimate fulfillment of that 9/11 vow to force a public conversation about the internal crisis facing the Bureau.
So after all these claims and this detailed account, what is the big takeaway? What does she want you to walk away with after reading the 2 FBIs?
Her core argument is that the crisis gripping the Bureau is not external. It's not about public perception or budgets. It is fundamentally internal.
Rooted entirely in the betrayal of integrity by the leadership she calls FBI 2.
Exactly. She insists the future of the Bureau depends on eliminating that political influence, on expelling FBI 2, restoring integrity, and tightening standards from Quantico all the way up.
But despite all of that, she does end on a note of hope.
She does. She concludes that the everyday agents, the members of FBI-1, are still the dedicated backbone and the heart of the organization. They're still out there doing noble, necessary work, sacrificing greatly despite the political decay she sees at the very top.
Okay, so this is obviously a very detailed and specific book. Who should pick this up? Who is this for?
Well, definitely anyone interested in the inner workings of federal law enforcement. If you're curious about the gritty details of FBI field operations, fugitive recovery, fraud, mass casualty response, her stories are incredibly compelling.
It also seems essential for anyone who reads political nonfiction, especially memoirs about whistleblowing within big federal agencies. Her claims about MYE, Crossfire Hurricane, the J6 investigations, it's a very specific insider perspective.
For sure. And finally, if you're just curious about the impact of these high-profile political events on the morale of rank-and-file agents, her description of the emotional toll of her work, contrasted with what she saw as a waste of resources on politics, is just incredibly raw and detailed.
So here's the final thought we want to leave you with, building on Nicole Parker's argument about this dichotomy she witnessed.
If as the book contends, political influence is allowed to compromise the operational integrity of an institution that is dedicated entirely to public safety and justice. What is the true long-term cost to the public's trust?
And if the integrity of the highest levels of law enforcement is subject to partisan influence, how can the average citizen, when they're facing the darkest moments of their lives, a victim of a violent crime, a victim of fraud, how can they determine who they can truly trust to administer impartial justice?
That question, born from the shadow of 9/11 and defining her final years in the Bureau, is really the driving urgency of her entire memoir.
Like, comment, and subscribe for more nonfiction summaries. If there's a new book you want us to read so you don't have to tell us in the comments.